Thank you all for joining us for live Q&A with Tina Law and Taylor Brown of Very CSS. This session is a complement to the bite-sized lunchtime talk you've already watched. Once again, Tina Law is a sociology PhD candidate at Northwestern University. Her research uses computational and quantitative methods in digital, administrative, and archival data to understand the social and political experiences of residents of color in US cities. Taylor Brown is a PhD candidate in sociology at Duke University, where her emphases are in computational methods and inequality. For her dissertation, Taylor investigates gender disparity in creative professions using machine learning and network analysis. Thank you both for joining us. So I have a few questions, and then I know our audience also have a few questions for you. We're so excited to have you with us. So I'm going to kick off by asking the both of you how your partnership began.
I guess I'll start. I think we shared a bit in the video with folks. And hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. We're so excited to be here. And we've both just been following along with SICSS-Howard Mathematica, and we love this site. I actually just watched one of the guest lecture videos yesterday for my own work, and I was like, this is super helpful. So we definitely wish we could be like participants there and definitely be there in person. So to answer the next question, how did this partnership begin? So we met at SICSS in 2018 at the Duke site, and so I think we were initially connected over email, and Chris Bale actually connected the two of us because we're both kind of interested in, you know, kind of expanding the universe of who participates in computational social science. And I think maybe like a funny quirk of our collaboration is like Taylor and I have actually like met in person like one time, and we've mainly just worked, you know, over phone, over email, and so it's been like a funny collaboration in that regard, but it's worked super well.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I mean, everything she said, and also that I hadn't thought about it till you just said it, Tina, but yeah, we've only met for, even at that, we only met for like a half an hour or something in person at some point, and now she's a great friend and an inspiring collaborator. So yeah, it's possible even in these times.
So, I think we just met for like 10 minutes in like the Duke cafeteria. That was that's the extent to which we've ever interacted in person. Yeah. But now, you know, we're like very much used to collaborating and hanging out with each other.
We have, you know, I think we're at 24 participants. You know, a few people who are on the same campuses or in the same area who may at some point have a chance to meet and work with each other, but we're across time zones and such. So for people who are here with us today who are building, you remember week 2, right? It's crazy. You're running around trying to figure out what your projects are. Oh, there's funding. I should apply for funding. So people are trying to figure out how this is going to work after this defined 2-week space when we're all together. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges of working together across, you know, across different time zones when you travel, or, you know, and just how you've maintained this and built this organization while never meeting each other? Well, once.
Yeah.
For 10 minutes in the cafeteria.
10 minutes, yeah. I mean, I would say, and this applies not only to our personal collaboration, but to the group that we kind of now have, and to, I would hope, academic projects generally, and also projects like Very CSS generally, which is try and make sure that you also have a grounding of friendship. Like there's of course a place to be quite professional, and there's going to be boundaries there under the right circumstances, especially when there's a power dynamic. But when there's a peer, as Tina and I are, I think that Tina and I now text about all sorts of things, and we're there for each other in a lot of ways. And I think that has helped the project persist even through a pandemic, and through it even kind of grew during the pandemic. The group that we've now got, that it's not just Tina and I anymore, came in a time when none of us I haven't met any of the other people in our group in person. But yeah, I would say that one way to really strengthen bonds and keep projects going is to make sure that you make time to get to know each other in more personal ways, because then you might be texting about something else or talking about something else, and you come back to your project and it's just a lot more natural. Yeah, Tina?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think not just with me and Taylor's collaboration, but also, you know, my collaboration with other folks that I met and, you know, became friends with through SICSS and during my time at Duke. You know, friendship is really kind of the basis of it. You know, every call, every check-in is just sort of like, hey, what's been going on? Like, what are you up to? And it's always kind of nice, especially, you know, for folks who are, you know, PhD students, as you kind of move along in your graduate career, you know, your world gets kind of smaller a little bit as you're kind of focusing on your work. So it's nice to kind of have colleagues across different spaces. But then, you know, the better understanding you have of each other as people, it really kind of helps your work together. Not only just in terms of, you know, like, I know Taylor's really going to be really busy this upcoming week or whatnot. So maybe like I'll do more of the work, and just being more cognizant of how you can share the work and, you know, where people's interests lie, so people can plug in where they need to, so that everyone is like fulfilled by the work that you're doing together. So that's kind of, I think, an important way to keep the work growing across space. Logistically, I mean, I think it's been fine. The only challenge is, like, Taylor and I are really bad at time zones, especially since I used to be based in the East Coast, but then I moved to Chicago, and then we've been having like the worst time trying to figure out that time zone. Like, we're always like, wait, is that an hour ahead? Is that an hour behind? So that's a logistical issue that we deal with.
I know there's the organizing teams across all sixes. There's some sort of app that was created to figure out the best time by time zone for participants. So maybe that I keep multiple time zones on my phone, and I still mess them up. So I hear you. So we have a question from Regina. Go ahead and turn on your camera, Regina.
Hi, so my question is that since the creation of Very CSS, I'm wondering what you're most proud of in terms of the contribution Very CSS has made to the field of computer science, and also like to the culture as well.
Okay, I mean, I can say one, which I think we conveyed in like our pre-recording, but the simplicity of the resource as it is now makes it pretty useful to a lot of people, and just hearing that people have relied on the lists of scholars that we've gathered or the list of resources we've gathered to change decisions that they were making, or to make it easier for them to go outside of the very kind of like incestuous bubble that any discipline gets into, where it's just, you know, you see the same people on panels and things. Hearing that there's actual changes being made in terms of who gets offered opportunities to teach or to speak at prestigious events, that's probably one thing I'm most proud of. I'm also very excited about some of the stuff that we're doing now on syllabi, because, you know, how we teach and what we count as real in our science, and therefore who we cite and things, is just foundational. So that's going to be really exciting, but it's just not too far along yet. But I do hope that it really does change syllabi in the future.
Yeah, I would agree with Taylor there. I think, I mean, we don't have really kind of advanced ways of tracking, you know, like our website. So when we get those emails or like comments from folks, that's been like helpful in connecting people, or, you know, finding cool speakers for conferences, that's really helpful. I think you know, over the long, it's still relatively new, like we haven't had it up for that long. But you know, over the long term, like, I think it would be really cool if it was just a site that people use because they were putting on conferences, you know, because they wanted to find, you know, cool people doing fantastic work. It was just kind of a go-to site in that regard. So yeah, I think for sure those are kind of the biggest kind kind of rewards of like the site in terms of like maintaining at this point. And I want to say too that this space is like super, I'm super appreciative of this space, because I think oftentimes, and you know, in academia in general, but also with this project, me and Taylor, you know, we've just kind of been going. There's not really kind of these opportunities to kind of pause and reflect. So that was like a great question. Like that was something that like Taylor and I wouldn't talk about necessarily in like a conversation, like, oh, what are we like most proud of that has happened so far? So having a moment to kind of reflect and also kind of appreciate where we've been and where we hope to go, I think is really, really helpful. And I hope folks get that space in their work as well.
We started our day today by talking about revisiting our laurels. We, you know, as people of color and as women, we don't get the benefit of or the opportunity to rest on our laurels. So, you know, taking that time is so important. Yandu's up next. I'm also going to drop something in the chat box. So there's actually a way you can report all male panels. If you happen to come across an all male panel, there's a Tumblr you can follow. You can document that all male panel you've seen, the manel. So it's kind of funny, but it's very valid. Yandu, you're next, then Yesh.
Oh, there we go. So I have an experimental psychology, linguistic type of background, and it's just until this program actually that I even learned like computational social science as an area of study and how it kind of fits into a lot of different fields. So my question is, how do you define computational social science? And I'm asking more so because I feel like I know a lot of people that could be interested in like being on this site, wanting to know about these resources, and I want to know how to market, promote this resource.
I can give it a shot, Tay, if you want a few more moments.
Yeah.
So that was like the challenging question that I think Taylor and I had at the beginning of the project, because we didn't want to be gatekeepers. Like we didn't want to put out a very rigid definition of what CSS is, and then, you know, have folks see that and think, you know, I don't fit that. And so what we tried to do, and the first batch of people that we put on the website, we just kind of got some suggestions from folks in the SICSS community. They just nominated some folks for us, and then we just put that up on the website, and that's kind of been it. So I guess like the short answer is like Taylor and I basically have gone around like never actually offering a concrete definition of CSS, but having it be just represented by like the people that we have on our website. But it is constantly changing, and I think we have like the traditional fields of, you know, computational social science represented, you know, across, you know, social science disciplines and computer science, and I think some engineers are on there too. We have like kind of the common methods that you kind of see in CSS, like we have network analysis people, we have text analysis people, some agent-based modelers, but there's certainly room to grow. And I think something that, you know, I've been kind of considering lately is, you know, perhaps like we could do more outreach in terms of covering folks who are using, you know, qualitative and mixed methods to engage with questions of like, you know, technology like algorithmic bias, or perhaps folks who use like digital data but are mainly working with qualitative methods. So, you know, like that's a group where it's like, they should be part of the conversation on CSS. Yeah, so that's just an example of how it like kind of grows, but that's my answer.
And I very much echo that. I will say 100%. I think the qualitative people, the qualitative scholars who are engaging with these new technologies that a lot of the like quantitative scholars might be then using in our field, or how taking a qualitative look at how a lot of these new technologies impact society is like 100% these people belong on our site as well. And I the only principle I would add is like, if you think you might fit, you probably do. Like if there's a question that you think your colleague is an amazing scholar and they kind of are relevant to CSS, like add their name, because I think that it's such an amorphous and young field. Just like, it's not even a field, it's like it's very hard to define what CSS is. Then yeah, you probably belong, and we put you on the site.
For those interested in qualitative discussions in the marriage with CSS, Laura Nelson is going to elucidate that tonight. So make sure you join us for live Q&A with Laura.
I'm gonna join that. She's
yeah, you're welcome to join us if you want. Taylor, if you want to come back, and Tina. And I'll also I'll add a question before I pass it off to Yash, which is, can you tell us a little bit about any gaps that are in your database right now? You've got an exceptionally diverse collection of people here. Probably, I'm comfortable saying the most diverse collection at any site this summer. Are there things that you're looking for that we can help you with? Or maybe some of us are that person.
I mean, so for sure, we just need more nominations in general. So it's still pretty small. I think we're still under 100, which can't be right. You know, there's got to be way more people out there who are doing great work in CSS and who are currently underrepresented. But in particular, like in terms of representation gaps, for sure, we need way more Black scholars, Latinx scholars, Indigenous scholars, Southeast Asian scholars. We don't have a lot of representation there either. Scholars who identify as queer, scholars who identify as transgender or non-binary. We are also, you know, really US focused at this point, US and Europe focused. We would like to see, you know, folks from who are working in other countries. Even within the US, we're really just looking at the East Coast and the West Coast. There's got to be folks who are doing great CSS work in the Midwest and in the South. So we want to see more people there. And one thing I wanted to add that kind of touches upon the last question that we had was that, you know, what Taylor said really, like, and I really want to emphasize this, like, please don't hesitate in either nominating yourself or someone you know. That's kind of one of the biggest challenges that we have in terms of this database is folks just self-selecting themselves out of the process. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had in person with folks where, like, you know, when I was an organizer for the Chicago site, I encourage, you know, all my participants to nominate themselves and people they know. And then inevitably, you know, I would have people come up to me afterwards saying, like, I don't know, like, do I fit the description? Like, do I belong in this space? And it's almost always women, and especially women of color, who are coming up to me, you know, just really kind of hesitant about whether they fit in this space. And just know, like, you belong here. We want you here. We need to see your work. Like, please nominate yourself and please nominate people that you know.
And as a site that was founded with the goal of amplifying Black voices and increasing the number of Black people in computational social science, I will do a heavy push of all the folks in this group to go ahead and do that. I may start nominating people. So the next question goes, and I haven't nominated myself yet, so that's my own imposter syndrome. Okay, but I will start nominating some people. I see you, Regina, Yandu. I'm going to nominate y'all. Yash, go ahead. You've got the next question.
Thank you so much, Taylor and Tina, for like Nanette said, someone ends up doing the heavy lifting in the beginning, and for nominating yourself to do this work, thank you so much. Like, I watched the video and it's really inspirational, the space you come from and the motivations. Also, I had a two-part question, which became one part now because of Yandu asking the question already. The question I had was, when you're creating this website, how did you go about the actual website design and collection? Have you had people reach out and say, oh, you should do this, you should do that, you should change it to look like this, or like change the format? So how did you navigate, okay, this is what we will do? Because once you start something, I feel like with collaborations, the other side of the coin is that you get too much input. So how do you navigate that is what I would be curious, because that would inspire a lot of us in this group who are learning collaboration and things like
I would say for the design, like when we first started, it was just Tina and I in a little bubble, and we just needed something, anything to like get ourselves started. And that's kind of where it stayed. And it was just like a GitHub website. It's quite simple. In fact, one of our more recent group meetings, we discussed the fact that we might want to grow beyond that. And one of our group members is currently exploring a redesign. And going to come back to the group with a proposal of a new way that we might be able to organize the site that is maybe more searchable, or provides for like not just the two tabs that we have where there's the list and the kind of list of groups, but also has this new resource we hope to provide, which is about syllabi and how to improve syllabi. So I don't think we faced that problem on design. I think maybe we're our own harshest critics on design, Tina and I, of like wanting that site to be way better, way more like searchable and things than it is. But in the other aspects of just having a lot of opinions and having more people, like I said, it wasn't a problem at first because it was just Tina and I. And now as the group has started to grow, it's still not that large, but I don't know, Tina, you can definitely correct me on this, but I would say that we do genuinely try to not make this Tina and I's thing in the group. We have a new practice where we rotate who kind of presides over the different meetings and who organizes the next. It tends to be that because we need some historical like anchor, someone who's definitely not going to leave this project, like Tina, it tends to be each time Tina and I with one other group member who's planning the next meeting or who is reporting on what we said in the last one and sending out an email. But other than that, I think we really do try. So in that, rather than keeping it like Tina and I's thing, we've just tried to flatten it and provide for a lot of discussion. We have not yet faced I don't think we've had a moment yet where there's been a lot of conflicting opinions and of what people want to do. But that might be because we're still facing some of the unfortunate but most obvious problems. And so we're like, okay, before we get on to something more complicated, we need to at least address like, this problem, which everybody agrees on. So, yeah.
I'm going to piggyback on that question because I know a lot of our teams are putting together budgets right now. So there's the option of funding from both SSRC, and then there's also potential for funding from Mathematica. So teams are putting together budgets, trying to figure out what do they need. Can you talk to us a little bit about where you started and where you are now, insofar as you're capable, with how much it actually costs to do this, and what are the things that you invested money in? And your sources of funding, if you don't mind sharing that too.
I mean, I would probably just say our stipends. That's our sources of funding, our graduate student stipends. I mean, yeah, Tina, we don't really have any funds. This is volunteer, and I don't think
no, we haven't. This is entirely volunteer run. This isn't like a SICSS sponsored project, although, Taylor and I are happy to talk about like the SICSS projects, having been, on the organizing side and the participant side of things. But yeah, I don't think there have been any costs aside from just kind of contributions of our time. I think Taylor, you paid for our domain name, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, I actually just expired and I renewed yesterday, but yeah, so that's it.
Yeah, so I think that's been our only cost, paying for the domain name. But in talking about, building budgets, oh man, I remember that week. Nanette said budgets for projects, and it brought me back to 2018. Me and my team were like spinning out. We're like, oh God, what are we gonna do? Because for many of us, it was like the first time we put together a proposal that included, a budget. So I think for that, I think what ended up happening is that we ended up putting our monies into spaces that were like more flexible. So we knew we wanted to do some kind of like experiment for our SICSS project. We weren't quite sure the particular bounds of that. So we just kind of asked for a lot of money to invest in Amazon Mechanical Turk so that we could run an experiment later on. But something that I wish that I had known you know, as I was like stressing out about putting together the budget, was that like things change, and like the folks who are reviewing your proposals, who in my case were like Matt and Chris, and then later on I was reviewing proposals as an organizer for SICSS Chicago, is that like, you know, folks understand that your project's going to change and they're going to be flexible with it. So you don't have to have every single thing figured out. You just kind of need, you know, big buckets of like where you need money for certain, you know, certain large tasks, and then things will work themselves out. But yeah, I don't know if Taylor, do you have anything to add? Yeah.
The only thing I would add is I do hope that we don't stand as an example that if you're doing work to improve the field, you should do it for free. Like that shouldn't be the case. I think that it's just kind of how this one ended up. And also this has just kind of snowballed. At first, Tina and I were like, let's just produce this like list of resources that people can draw on. And now it's kind of become, especially after there was a meeting encouraged by Nanette last year at SICSS of a SICSS alumni about how we can kind of be a more anti-racist institution as SICSS, and also just improve our field more generally. And that, I mean, credit to Nanette, and has really been the impetus to create this group that is now kind of having a larger endeavor than Tina and I started with, which is improving the syllabi and doing more work. So it's grown into something that in the long run potentially should deserve funding externally. But yeah, I don't want to send out the signal that like, if you're doing this sort of work, it should be volunteer, because actually I don't believe that.
No, for sure.
That's not me complaining that I'm not paid. It's more me getting that recognition of like, the burdens often fall on in the wrong places of who ends up doing the work, and they deserve to be compensated for it, or at least supported in a way, because you do take time out of your personal, like the type of capital you would be investing in for your career advancement. Time gets taken away from that, but you do it because you think it's for the best. So yeah, I just want to throw that out.
Absolutely agree with Taylor there. For sure, like this type of work, you know, if folks want to embark on similar types of projects, like, you know, please pursue funding, and folks who have funding, please fund these types of projects. There's, you know, this has been an endeavor where, you know, it's been volunteer driven, but like, who's to say like what we could have done, you know, if there was like funding available, if anything, you know, to bring folks together to like meet in person, and to, you know, have more dedicated time to work through these like issues and like topics together. I mean, that would be like super cool. But yeah, so for sure, definitely want to just completely agree with what Taylor just mentioned.
And I appreciate the question, because it does make me think that for the website redesign, we should apply for money and just hire like an actual web designer to do that.
With that in mind, I would like to make an offer. I would like to help the two of you to organize all the women organizers in a proposal to SSRC this year. So I am happy to put forward my name. There need to be at least 2 people involved from 2021, I think, pulling the organizers together to do that, because you should have funds for your website redesign, or at the very least to fund your time. I'm also happy to help put in a proposal to Mathematica for that, because what you're doing is incredible to change our field, and it hurts my soul a little bit to hear that y'all are reaching into your stipends. I have definitely done that with my research assistants. So I am happy to do that. Let's make a plan. It's not due till August. Let's absolutely make a plan, and I will happily fall in line behind your leadership and your team to do that. But this is too important to our field to have you all not have funding. So let's work on that. I'm also going to throw out another question while I wait for people to add their names to the queue. So can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with curriculum? So our own site, we were a bit traumatized by the Twitter the Twitter exercise with the great orange ones tweets. We had to do something on President Trump. I would have preferred to have something that was a little bit more focused on anti-racism, anti-Black racism, and inequity. But this is our first year. So as we look towards new exercises and things, if people here have ideas, Is there a way that they can get involved with the curriculum work and also with designing new exercises? Can you tell us about that work?
Tina, why don't you answer the first about getting involved, and then I'm happy to give a picture of like what we've been doing so you can understand even more. So maybe you have better ideas of how you could get involved.
Yeah, that sounds good. So we're always happy to have folks get involved with Very CSS. I mean, like Taylor had mentioned, like we never envisioned this as like a 2-woman endeavor. We were kind of hoping that, you know, we would kind of grow the base of folks who were involved in this project and have a really kind of democratic kind of leadership over the website and anything that happens there. And so for sure, you can certainly get involved. And, you know, there's different levels of involvement, you know, and we understand that folks are busy and a lot of folks are volunteering their time. So for sure, you know, you can help us a ton by just kind of nominating yourself for the website and submitting nominations. You can get involved with our current CSS syllabus design group. So we've been meeting for we've met a few times over the past 6 months, or no, more than 6 months, for the past year. And we actually have an upcoming meeting in July if folks, you know, want to jump in then. I think we're meeting in mid-July. And it's a group of us. It's me and Taylor, and then it's folks largely drawn from the SICSS community, but, you know, from folks all over the US. We also have some participants abroad, and they're across like different fields and across different kind of parts of their professional career. And so we're happy to have you to join the conversation. So that's one way to get involved very quickly in terms of like jumping into the curriculum design stuff. And then of course, something that we are hoping to kind of provide as like kind of a space for people who maybe can't make the meetings all the time, but want to be involved is we're probably going to at some point want some folks that, you know, can offer some time to just review the stuff that we create to get their input. We have like sort of like an email list where we're kind of keeping folks in the loop. And so we have folks on there that like haven't been able to make the meetings, but they want to be included in the email, so they're kept in the loop. No one's been asked to be taken off the list so far, so I think folks are really interested in being involved. But yeah, those are kind of 3 different ways, and I think Taylor's going to talk a bit more about where we're at with this kind of syllabus design group. But if you want to be involved, just email me and Taylor. While Taylor's talking, I'm going to drop our emails in the chat box, so you can just contact us.
Yeah, we would love to have everyone, and I would just harken back to what we said earlier about we do try and like premise our group as well on friendship. So like come, be our friend, be involved, and know on the basis of that friendship that we're all very sensitive to the fact that like sometimes you won't make it. Life happens, right? But that doesn't mean like you should select out entirely. In terms of just where that came from, the syllabi kind of improvement initiative, I think it is probably helpful to give a bit of history on that. And basically, I mean, we just all knew as a little subset of 6 participants that most of the syllabi we saw throughout this, I mean, a lot of computational social science courses at different universities have only been created in the past like 5 years, because this is such a new thing. And yet even in the novelty of it, we were like the novelty of the syllabi, we were seeing a lot of the same citations, and it was mostly white men. And one of our group members' guidance kind of, we knew we wanted to improve, and he made this suggestion. It kind of came from the group of like, we need to know where we are before we know where we're going. And then another one of our group members, Catherine, pointed us to this book, Data Feminism, which I encourage everyone to check out. It's by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein. And they, in writing their own book about data and feminism, had a very principled approach to who they were going to cite. And they went very empirical about it, set quotas, remained transparent, reported on what their proportions of different citations were. And that kind of started as the basis of ours. And they were guided in their audit of their own book by some principles. And just as a group, we sat down, we read through their principles, and we discussed which ones we wanted to adopt, which ones we wanted to change. And that led us to kind of a working set of principles that we have now, which I hesitate to read just because it's like a list of auspicious sounding principles, but I will just, I will read them really quickly. Dismantle existing power structures, insist on intersectionality, advocate for equity, emphasize positionality, context, and nestedness when prioritizing proximity in terms of your data, acknowledge the humanity of data, be reflexive, transparent, and accountable, and remain maximally inclusive. So those were kind of, as a group, we came up with these principles, and then only at that point did we turn to existing syllabi and say, okay, what sort of questions, given these principles, are we going to ask about the syllabi to try and improve them? And those have led to, then we kind of like split up by topic and each took a different syllabi and returned and said, what did you find? Like in looking at these syllabi, how could they, you know, who did they include? Who did they cite? What topics did they engage with? Who did, like how proximal are the researchers cited to the research topic that they are studying? Because a lot of times maybe there's this phenomenal computational social science study that was carried out by white scholars in Brazil, white scholars from America in Brazil. And that's like quite a distal, you're very distant from the topic that you're studying. And we wanted to emphasize in syllabi researchers who are very proximal to their topics and things. So these sort of questions we asked, and that's kind of where we're at now. The interesting thing is that in our first meeting back, after kind of doing a pass of different topics, some people studied text analysis, like went to and looked at text analysis portions of a syllabi. Others went to the machine learning sections. Other people went to digital trace data. But when we all came back as a group and say, what did you find? We found a lot of the same patterns across syllabi. So now we're at the point of, okay, how do we move forward? What are going to be our accountable, transparent principle, like to make suggestions of how people can improve? So yeah, that's kind of a quick history of the project on the syllabi. And why you haven't necessarily seen suggestions yet is because we're just at that point of defining, given what we found, what sort of resources do we want to gather. So if you want to come join that conversation and advocate that we need to move in this direction, we need much more like non-US scholars or explicitly anti-colonialist research in this, then like come advocate for that, and it will probably get on our little addendum for future professors to use when creating CSS syllabi.
So I also want to throw a resource in, and I'm happy to make an introduction for you all if you like. Cite Black Women Collective is pretty amazing. So we tried to get them to come speak. We're hoping maybe to get them next year, but they advocate for, and I don't know if you all noticed, but one of our faculty members in our very first roundtable was wearing a Cite Black Women t-shirt. But they advocate for citing Black women. They also advocate for making sure you are paid for your time, which is why they didn't join us this year. And I'm going to be advocating for, and I think that's why we don't see a lot of Black folks speaking at SICSS. I'm going to be advocating for thinking about actually compensating people for their time, including y'all. So we're sending you a gift bag. No money yet, but gift bag. So we have our next question from Yandu. Yandu, please jump in.
So kind of I guess in the spirit of these principles that you've just mentioned, how has creating this network of computational social science scientists, as well as, I guess, just being aware of the low diversity in the field, affected your own work, if at all?
I mean, I don't see how, yeah, I mean, I think for me at least, like it makes me very cognizant when I'm doing my own work of, you know, if I'm like reviewing an article or, you know, looking at a study, I'm like, what's not being discussed here? Or like what important works have been left off here? And so I think even, so it makes me, you know, search more broadly for literature for sure in my own work. And then when I'm, you know, working on my own, you know, manuscripts or whatnot, I it's not super systematic, but I am kind of auditing my own citations. Just to make sure that like I'm not just citing, you know, the dominant kind of studies that are out there that are almost always by white men based in the US. And so it makes me, you know, reflective of, you know, my practices in my work in that regard. I think there's probably more ways too, but off the top of my head, that's like for sure one way that like me being engaged in this project has made me think more deeply about how I do my work.
I would say the same. I would say if and when I create a syllabus, it's going to be way different than it would have been prior to starting these, being a part of this group. And it's also, I think my involvement in all of this has stripped away a certain degree of, I don't want to say admiration, but I'm grasping for a word here. I'm not quite as impressed by the standard quo of prestige that I used to be. That's like a very sociological way to put it, but like a lot of the institutions and things that I aspire to as a woman, I don't aspire to as much anymore. And also like as a white woman, I'm less inspired by and want to put a lot of my energies and efforts toward not necessarily buttressing the way we've always done things or the institutions in which we've always done them, and moving my efforts like in a very genuine, heartfelt way somewhere else, not just because I should, but because I've actually lost interest in some of the status hierarchies that I used to really try and fit into, and that either I never really fit into or I fit into just fine, but I don't actually think I should have, or that I don't want to be a part of them as much anymore. So that is like outside of my academic work, like the documents that I write and the code that I write, just my practice of my career, what I'm aspiring to be and leave behind has changed a lot because of my involvement with this.
And I guess thinking on it more, that's a good question. I mean, it's not a question that like, I get some time to think about on a day-to-day basis. I mean, for sure, it's also made me realize that like, there's, my work isn't purely defined by like, just the research that I do kind of want to have some kind of way to engage like a broader audience and, have more kind of ways to interact with folks out of, the 5 people that might read an article or something, So, and I think another thing that it's kind of probably the most important thing that's come out of this project that's really affected my work is in kind of working with Taylor. It's really taught me, that like, we should feel okay in setting the tone for things sometimes. And a lot of the ways that even just like simple things in terms of how meetings are often held in academia are not inviting sometimes, and they're often really condescending, and people leave feeling really terrible about themselves. And I think in kind of just working with Taylor, I mean, at first it was just kind of the 2 of us, but now we're kind of sharing this too with kind of our little work group of CSS syllabus people. It's just like, hey, we can set the tone of these meetings. Like, these don't have to be meetings where like you leave feeling terrible or like feeling like really kind of less than human and less than like who you are, and you can be proud and you can like express vulnerability and uncertainty about things. So I think that's kind of been my biggest kind of takeaway from like this project is like we can and in academia, especially as like a grad student, you can kind of get kind of like inured to feeling really powerless in that position, that you don't have much clout in what goes on, but you do have a lot of you do have a lot of influence on your peers or in the spaces that you operate. And especially if you have folks who are around you who are also kind of supportive of the values that you share, together, you can really help to kind of redefine the tone and a lot of feelings in certain spaces. So I think that's something that I've really kind of learned in working with Taylor on this project. One of the things I've really valued working with Taylor, and hopefully it's something that folks in our work group now also kind of feel is like different from what defines working in this space as opposed to like other spaces.
So I want to remind everyone that you've now met, I think, 3 other organizers besides me of sites. So as all of you start to think about if you want to start your own site, or take over a site, or become an organizer at a site that only has one person, that goes to Ebony and and Nicole out there. Howard, if you want to start a site, you've now got Taylor, you've got Tina, you've got Jay, right? There's a ton of us organizers floating around, so pick our brains. Yes, you got the next question.
I also want to shout out to Yondo for like all his amazing questions, because like the last answer that Taylor and Tina gave me, like I have like goosebumps about like privilege, prestige, intersectionality, and structurality. Oh my God. My question is not as deep, but I did want to pick your brains a little further about what is CSS, in the sense that you're kind of looking at syllabi, and in a way you are shaping what CSS could be in the future. So where I'm coming from is CSS itself is interdisciplinary, in the sense it's computation and sociology coming together. So when we have further layers like CSS in education, CSS in health, CSS in something else, like multidisciplinary CSS, something when Taylor mentioned about proximity, about researchers to the research, would that also be relevant to the distance between disciplines? Would CSS in education be considered further away from these getting into your CSS syllabus, versus it has to be more, it has to be a certain percentage of CSS to make the cut? Or kind of like, how do you think about it? Because I'm also thinking about, would that translate into how people perceive themselves to be on the website, because their proximity to CSS? Just a thought, like, what are your thoughts on that kind of like?
I like that you premised that question as not as deep, because that's like it's a very deep question. It gets at, yeah, the root of like, what is CSS, you know, and those sorts of questions are always super deep and super important. Tina, do you have any thoughts? And I'm gonna pivot over to
She's trying to volunteer Tina to go first.
No, I'm happy to go first, but do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, those might have to be a collaborative answer. I mean, first of all, that's a great question. You should join us in July, mid-July, where we can discuss this further. I mean, I don't know. I think certainly, as much as Taylor and I, like in our group, you know, we don't want to be gatekeepers for what defines what CSS is and isn't. We are cognizant of the fact that, like, you know, we do have some influence, especially, you know, as folks are kind of like looking to the website, you know, folks may take away that like this should be the definition, and we want to offer, you know, like a broad array of interests and topics and things that folks study on the website, so that it's a very kind of diverse view in terms of, you know, substantive topics and methods and whatnot of what folks do in CSS. But you know, part of that means making sure that, you know, we do have the right folks in the conversation, so that, you know, what we do offer, and we want to offer things up as like a prototype, not as a final product. I think that's kind of been kind of like a guiding principle in our work, is that like we just want to offer up like a draft, and this will continue to be, you know, worked on by us, by people who join us. But we do just want to put something out there so we can get feedback on it. I mean, it's kind of like, you know, anything else that you do when you're working in academia, just putting something out there so folks have something to react to. So I think for us, you know, part of that, you know, ensuring what you were talking about, it means, you know, making sure that, you know, our first prototype that we put up is, you know, the best that we know of at that present time, but definitely we always are, you know, making sure that, you know, we say that, you know, we definitely are open to improvement, we're open to suggestions, and making sure that the people who help us make that first prototype, you know, are from all different walks of not only like academic life, but like life in general. So I think that's one way where we're trying to go about things. But certainly, like, I don't think we've come up to, you know, a really good solution for that yet.
I think yeah, to kind of piggyback off what Tina said, it did require of us as just two people to accept the fact that what we were going to put out was perfect. And we took comfort in the fact that there was nothing else really out there before us to help in these initiatives, you know, or this effort of making our field less white, less male, or just rather even more than that, like more everything else. And because we knew our field would be better for it, right? And that did, I think Tina and I both, I mean, you don't get into this degree of academia without being somewhat of a perfectionist. So that's hard. It's hard to put out something like that. But I will say, as someone who, like, humble brag, just submitted my dissertation yesterday for defense, like, definitely, thank you very much. Definitely, like, I encourage all of you on these projects you're working at SICSS, and in anything to, often, early, and in places that you feel both comfortable and a bit challenged, share your work, even when it's not perfect. And that's kind of, you know, the take that we've taken in Very CSS is like, this isn't perfect. We might get it wrong. These are really sensitive topics in a lot of respects. Some of the things that we're pushing and putting a definition on it can make it even more sensitive. So we've tried to remain open. But also, yeah, recognizing we're not perfect yet. We're making it happen. To dig just a couple sentences on the, like, proximity of disciplines, I think that kind of takes us back to the desire to redesign the site. I think if there were more ways on the site that to cluster and change people's affiliation. So maybe you only want to look at people studying education, then you get a sense of what CSS is within education by looking at these scholars relative to one another. Maybe you really just have would you call it a mantle? Maybe you have a mantle and you want to look for women, and so you're going to cluster the site by that. Or maybe you're looking at across all disciplines and all different people. I want to see anyone working with text analysis, and so you could do that. That's not currently possible on the site because it's a quite simple site. But I think that intersection of this question you have about what is CSS with the website design is probably one way of not defining it, but allowing it to define itself.
I have a follow-up question. Had you thought about, so it sounds like after nomination, do you ask people to opt in? So you get there, after that you reach out to them and ask them if they want to be on the website, or what's the process? And did you thought about changing that as a means by which to greatly increase the number of people there? So I'm just imagining scraping all of the women off of the SICSS page. You know, what sort of led to the nomination choice?
So we get, you know, we just get the nominations. We could reach out, I suppose, to the folks who are nominated. We haven't done that yet, which maybe is something we should do, because sometimes we'll get emails from folks who didn't know that they were on the site, but someone reached out to them because they were on the site, and they sent us a thank you for having added them to the site. And we're like, oh, cool. So we haven't really done that, but perhaps we could. We could probably do more efforts where we, like, just go around and start, like, scraping the SICSS website and just kind of adding everyone there. We haven't done that yet because I think you know, we really like this kind of, like, peer nomination approach, but it's certainly something we could, like, think about in the future.
I think it might be a good idea to take the people who are nominated, let them know they're nominated, and ask them if they have any nominations to add. That might be a great way to be like, hey, pay it forward, you know, that expand the utility of this site for everyone.
I love it, and I'm so appreciative of the fact, Tina and Taylor and Tina, that you gave us your time today. We are so appreciative of the work that you're doing, and I'm excited to see sort of what unfolds from here. I am going to quickly For all our participants, drop a document in the chat box to remind you to sign up to give presentations on Friday, whether you're an individual or a team. Presentations. Please check in with Jing Han and Erica. Too, they have a challenge with when they present, and I know they'd appreciate some help with making sure they're scheduled at the time they need, so check in with them. Thank you everyone for joining us for this bite-sized lunchtime talk with two phenomenal women. And we hope to see you maybe for our event later, for Laura later, maybe if you all want to join, you're welcome to. Have a great afternoon, everyone. The rooms are open. Please head to your Hangout rooms if you would like to meet with your groups, or Hangout if you have questions. Thank you all for watching. For more information on SICSS-Howard Mathematica, visit our website, follow us on social media, and join our email list.